Hello everybody, it's Crystal Laura, and today we're taking a look at the LG G5 versus the Nexus 6P. These days, we're seeing lots of smartphone companies ditching plastic and moving to an all-metal design. And this year, LG has done exactly that with their all-metal LG G5. Both the G5 and Nexus 6P sport an all-metal design, but even with the G5 being made from metal, thanks to that extra layer of primer coating, the phone feels a little plasticky and less premium than the build of the 6P. There's also some questionable design features with the G5, like the curving of the top and bottom making the phone appear it's bent, and also the sudden breaks along the chamfered edges to make it look like the paint is chipping. When putting these phones side by side, the Nexus 6P certainly stands out in terms of design. One of the biggest differences when it comes to design is the size of these two phones. The Nexus 6P sports a 5.7-inch display, while the G5 is much smaller at 5.3, which makes the 6P a full 10 millimeters taller and about 3 millimeters wider. So yeah, the G5 is much easier to handle, slip into a pocket, and use one-handed. And another reason why the 6P is much taller than the G5 is the large bezels. But there's a reason for these large bezels, and that is the front-facing speakers. They're on the top and bottom of the display, making for a great experience when watching videos. The speakers are aimed right at you, and you have this nice stereo effect. On the G5, your speaker's on the bottom of the phone, where it can easily be covered up, and you don't get this nice stereo effect. But that being said, the G5 gets just as loud as the 6P, although the quality is not the greatest. The back of these phones are quite similar now that LG has relocated the volume buttons while leaving the power button. We have large black visors near the top with a fingerprint scanner below. Now, unlike the 6P scanner, the G5's fingerprint scanner doubles as a power button. However, the scanner works similarly to the 6P's, where even if the screen is off, your fingerprint will still be read. The G5's fingerprint scanner is actually faster than the 6P's, letting you reach the home screen around half a second faster every single time. But due to this super fast scanner that's also a power button, it can get frustrating because sometimes you want to check your lock screen to see your notifications, and the scanner will read your fingerprint super fast, taking you straight to the home screen. A good workaround for this though is with the tap to wake and tap to turn off feature that cannot be found on the 6P. Some may think that the LG G5 isn't the prettiest of phones, and even though the Nexus 6P is a little odd looking itself with that large black visor, it's still the better looking of the phones in my opinion. However, the strange design choices of the G5 become more forgivable once you remember that this is a modular phone. Even with the G5 having an all-metal design, you can still take it apart in seconds to access things like the battery, which is a first for a smartphone. Simply push the button on the bottom left and pull the battery out. This allows for the swapping of batteries, so when your G5 dies, you can be back up and running within seconds. On the Nexus 6P, you'll have to be glued to a charger for a while. This creative feature isn't just for battery swapping though. It opens up a whole new line of accessories which LG calls friends, including a camera module that has physical controls and dials for zoom, and other features making it similar to a DSLR. The modular capabilities of the LG G5 make it stand out from not only the Nexus 6P, but really any phone on the market as of now, although you'll have to ask yourself how often will you actually be using these accessories. Like I said, the Nexus 6P is a much bigger phone, mostly due to that large 5.7-inch display. It's one of the best looking displays on the market right now, with this AMOLED technology and beautiful vibrant colors. Dark areas of images look very nice with the pixels turning off underneath, creating true blacks, which leads to apps that take advantage of this, like night clocks or battery-saving dark themes. It's also a Quad HD display, which makes images and text very sharp, and with a punch-up in colors, this definitely has the LG G5's display beat. But that's not saying that the G5's display isn't great though. It's also Quad HD, however it is smaller and it's not AMOLED, instead is an LCD IPS panel. Due to this smaller screen size, this Quad HD resolution does give more pixels per inch, but between the two phones you probably won't even notice. The color temperature is much cooler on the G5, but when comparing photos, the 6P definitely is the most preferable. Of course, with the G5 being about 6 months younger than the 6P, is going to have a much better spec sheet. This is one of the fastest phones out right now on paper and even in real-world performance. We got the Snapdragon 820 versus the older 810, Adreno 530 over Adreno 430, and 4 gigs of RAM versus 3 gigs. The G5 always opens apps faster than the Nexus 6P. Sometimes it's a split-second difference, or sometimes even a full second. Geekbench gave the G5 a nice rating of 5,132, while the 6P only received 4,214. And Tutu's benchmark had an even bigger difference between the two, with 125,000 on the G5 and only 69,000 with the 6P. When loading graphic-intensive games like Asphalt 8, the G5 usually ends up loading the game a good 5 seconds before the 6P. Battery life on these phones is a much different story, however, with the Nexus 6P's battery being much bigger at 3,450 mAh over the G5's pretty tiny 2,800. In the time I had with these phones, using both pretty moderately, the G5 would usually die before the end of the day with a few hours to go, while the Nexus 6P usually had just enough juice to get me through the entire day. I was looking at about 3.5 hours of screen on time with the LG G5 and 4 to 4 hours and 15 minutes with the Nexus 6P. But like I said before, the G5's battery is capable of being removed and swapped with another fully charged one, which in some ways is better than the 6P. We do have USB Type-C charging ports on both phones, which is great because that means you'll have fast charging on both, fast data transfer speeds, and also the nice reversible USB Type-C cable. Unfortunately though, this will be the only way to charge both of these phones as wireless charging is unavailable in both. Like all LG G phones, you're going to have access to a microSD card slot, something that you don't have with the 6P. So you'll be good with getting a cheaper model of the G5 with low storage space and buy cheap microSD cards for storing pictures, songs, and movies, whereas with the 6P, you'll have to spend some extra money for that larger size model. Although both phones are running Android Marshmallow 6.0.1, their experiences are totally different. The 6P is running 100% stock Android, which is created and designed by Google. This is the experience Google intended Android to be, following material design guidelines and with the features they believe are worth having. And because of this, whenever Google releases a new version of Android, or even a small update, the 6P will be able to install that update immediately the day it comes out. LG G5 owners will have to wait a while until their phones receive this update because this version of Android Marshmallow has been heavily skinned with lots of features added. It behaves totally different, so it will take some more time for LG to update their skin. But that's not saying that LG's version of Android is worse than Google's stock version. It really all comes down to preference, and this year LG's skin is actually much more toned down and less cluttered. Overall, the software experience definitely feels much more complete with the 6P, which is going back to what I was saying with Google's attention to detail. The G5's icons may look a little old-fashioned to some, and the folder opening animation comes from the middle of the screen instead of where the actual folder is located. The settings menu makes it harder to find things with its 4 sections, and yeah, you don't have an app drawer by default, but you can get it back with an updated version of the home launcher. Sure, these are just little things and aren't going to be a deal breaker for most, but the Nexus 6P's main selling point is its stock Android experience, and it definitely is superior here. Last year, in our Best of Android camera comparison, all of us voted and named the Nexus 6P the best phone when it comes to picture quality. But this year, there may be a new winner. LG is always experimenting with their cameras, and this year is no different with the G5 sporting 3 cameras, 1 selfie camera and 2 front-facing cameras, with one of them being a wide-angle lens. Okay, so first, you'll notice that the LG G5's main camera is not as wide-angled as the 6P's. If you take a look at the right side of the photos, you'll notice a stop sign and tree next to it, where both are gone on the G5. But of course, that's why we have the other camera with a wide-angle lens, which creates an amazing photo. But let's go back and examine these shots. Now, with HDR off, the LG G5 is always going to take the better photo. It's a much more natural shot with better dynamic range. The 6P has a lot more contrast and its colors are not as nice. But once you crank on HDR, or HDR Plus as it's called in the 6P, both photos become beautiful. HDR is a lot more subtle on the G5, where the difference on the 6P is night and day. Those colors just come to life, and the blue of the sky really comes through, more so than the G5. But still, we have a much more contrasty image with the 6P. With the G5, you can actually make out the details within the shadows, where the 6P just crushes them. colors are a lot deeper on the 6P, while the G5s are more bright and realistic. Exposure seems to be better with the G5 as well, lots of time when HDR is on both cameras. There's also much more detail when zooming in with the G5 thanks to its extra megapixels, but it's certainly up to preference. The wide-angle camera, although with this noticeable downgrade in quality, creates stunning images. The LG G5 also has a full manual mode, something that the 6P does not have. But even without its manual controls, the G5 can get a lot closer to subjects than the 6P. Overall, the G5 is just a much more fun camera to use. However, once we get into lower lit areas, it loses some of its fun. With HDR off, the G5 is a clear winner with this brighter image with much better colors and less noise, but when we turn HDR on both phones, the G5 creates the same image, while the 6P boosts up its brightness, really saturates colors, and gets rid of all that noise. Sure, the G5 can still create a sharper image, and you could probably end up editing it to make it better than the 6P, but right out of the camera, the Nexus 6P has a G5 beat in this area. The selfie camera is another area where the 6P beats the G5, especially when HDR is on each. The G5 struggles with dynamic range with the front-facing camera, while the 6P is perfect. But once we get to video, the LG G5 comes back as the winner. The G5 has optical image stabilization, unlike the 6P, to create crazy smooth playback. Colors are also a lot better, and the overall image is brighter. The 6P seems to crush the blacks way too much. The G5 does hunt around a lot for focus though, and is prone to this weird glitch. If you look closely, you'll see the G5 hunt for focus every second or so, but not all G5s have this problem, and it only shows up sometimes. You can also record with the wide-angle lens, which is pretty cool. So, what's the better smartphone? This has really been a back and forth type of comparison. The LG G5 will slaughter the Nexus 6P in one area while being destroyed by it in another. But a lot of the downsides to the G5 are forgivable. Sure, it's not the best looking phone, but that's because it's modular. And the battery is below average, but it's removable. In some areas, the LG G5 is amazing and a leader among other phones in the market, but in other areas it underperforms. Whereas the 6P in almost every area is just pretty good. Anything you throw at the 6P, it'll handle really well. It's a very well thought out phone with no huge downsides, but no huge upsides either. There's really no clear winner because it comes down to preference. What is the user going to use the phone for? It all comes down to picking and choosing what features will actually be used. Although a big selling point of the Nexus 6P is its low price of only around $400 to $450, whereas the LG G5 starts at around $650 to $700. So what do you guys think? We're very interested to hear from you, so please in the comments below, let us know which of these two phones you prefer. Also, if you haven't already, check out this review of the LG G5 that's playing, and head on over to AndroidAuthority.com for the full in-depth comparison. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like because that really helps out, and subscribe because we are your source for all things Android.